Yo, welcome, welcome to Opulence pilot precognition episode. Colloquium de retro causalitas. Causalitas. Colloquium de retro causalitas. Or a conversation about retrocausality. Alright, I'm going to get in my flow. So I'm going to drop the link early in case somebody wants to come up. Stay on subject. You don't stay on subject, then you're out of here. You know? This is very important. We're going to get more into it. This is a precog. This is just a precog episode. Once the official episode is launched, we'll be getting further into the purpose of the channel, of Opulence, and what is the anima opulenta and or opulent soul. Where this thought, this theory originated, how it's observable in science, and maybe in some cooperation we'll figure out how to attain it together. You feel me? Give me 2 seconds. 2 seconds. We're getting right to it. We got a couple warm-up clips, and then we're getting right into the meat and potatoes of the show. All right. Let's let this rock first. We're gonna let these people talk a little bit. If anybody has any questions or want to jump into the show and add something, go ahead. But right now, if you have no idea what retrocausality is, I'm gonna let other people give you their ideas before I give my idea or my augmented view of whatever the fuck they're doing. Yep, I curse. Too bad. Let's go.
So, retrocausality. How would you design an experiment to study whether you can influence the past from the present? Well, I'll tell you about one experiment that did that. Basically, what they did is they took a specific type of hospital patient, that is, someone who acquired an infection in a hospital from 10 years in the past. And they randomly split them into two groups, A and B, and then they had healers heal group A. So this was blind to the healers, randomly assigned, and then they went back and did statistical analysis on the outcomes for these two groups. The group that was healed 10 years in the past lived much longer, got out of the hospital faster, just had much better outcomes across the board. And the group B that did not get healed, they stayed in the hospital longer with these hospital-acquired infections and basically just had worse outcomes. Statistically,
you're not going to get psychological depth.
Yo, did they seriously give me a commercial? All right, so I guess that clip ended right there. And let me take this off the screen. Before I move on to the next clip, I don't want to get too deep into it, but one thing he says, like, retrocausality, can we affect the past, you know? And then it becomes like a creepy thought. And I believe that comes from linear thinking, you know, because the problem is you're not affecting the past, you're not affecting the future, you are affecting the continuous now. You feel me? There is just now. Everything's happening at once. You feel me? But how do I say this? But within this all-encompassing experience, there are points of reference because spirit. I'm not saying we don't know exactly how this place works, but there are points of reference, meaning like, perfect. Points of reference are emotionally charged. You feel me? That's the best way to say that. Points of reference are emotionally charged. Give me 2 seconds. So let's move along. Oh, we got it.
Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Let's go.
Backward causality
Backwards causality.
is one way to look at it. Or
It's a very hot topic in modern physics. There have been 3 conferences on retrocausality at the University of California in San Diego, because not particularly stimulated by extrasensory perception research, but because on the micro level in modern physics, there's more and more evidence that in certain cases, things occurring in the future can affect the past.
Well, I know one of the important principles in theoretical physics is symmetry, and the idea being that if time moves, or if events or particles can move forward in time, there ought to also be processes, waves or particles, that move the other direction.
That's right.
That would be required for symmetry, which seems to exist throughout the world of physics.
Well, it makes us nervous because it seems to interfere with our free will. If you have a dream about something occurring, does it have to happen? And my feeling about that is that you have a little bit of free will, but much less than you might imagine.
Yeah.
I basically, as a physicist, believe in determinism.
This is where I depart from their thought. And these guys, let me not bring any mundane concepts into this, but certain types of people, they get caught up in this free will thing when it comes to the idea of precognition or retrocausality or whatever. I don't see that as an issue if this is all an illusion. You feel me? If this is all an illusion and we are just living experience in this 3D projected reality, which will really boil it down, it's just fucking emotion and light. It's just emotion, light, vibrations, waves. It's at the core, and all this stuff is constantly moving. You feel me? So it's just a soup, a cosmic slop. You feel me? It's a cosmic slop. So the present affecting the past doesn't have, that's linear thing. Okay, of course the present is gonna affect the past if everything is happening at once, because you made a new in changing the past and in simultaneously affecting what's happening presently in your time. It's so crazy to even try to. Here's the thing. It's kind of like, I don't want to give this. I don't even drop that name right now. It's kind of like that. This is why this is so difficult, because the terms, the mathematics, the ideas, all this shit has been put into this box. When they're probably not, these people are researching outside of this box. If retrocausality is easy, if superposition is real and has been observed, then retrocausality is easy. There's nothing to wonder about. And it hasn't quantum entanglement also been observed? So what's so crazy about precognition and retrocausality? You feel me? Like, it's like row your boat gently down the stream, but you're not the only boat in the stream, man.
If the wheel falls off your car, it's because the nuts came loose, not because of some psychic occurrence.
Yeah.
Now, if you dream about the wheel coming off the car, that might be stimulated by you're noticing that the nuts are loose, or noticing that somewhere missing subconsciously. So I think that you don't have to have that experience. I think that you can use precognitive experiences of the future to avoid having the catastrophic experience that was signified by the dream. And we know of an example of that, where on 9/11, there were 4 airplanes that were brought down or crashed as a result of the terrorists
Hijacked
airplanes. And all of those planes had half or fewer of the normal capacity of passengers.
And that's one example of several others we could cite. Parapsychologists have looked at train crashes and have found that
William Cox did a similar observation of train crashes on the East Coast, and discovered that even if you normalize them for bad weather or for holidays, trains that are going to crash have fewer people on them. The trains are not going to crash. Now, you can't prevent the train crashing, but you don't have to participate in the experience.
Well, it certainly suggests that at a subliminal level, the human mind is scanning for possible dangers out there in the environment, including in the future. And no doubt the people who avoided being on those planes and trains were not even conscious necessarily about why they made those decisions.
Subsequently, a number of them were interviewed on they had a bad feeling that they just didn't want to, they don't know why. They didn't want to do that.
We call it a premonition.
That's right, or presentiment. Presentiment is a premonition of something, usually something bad.
Well, which brings up another whole line of research in parapsychology where stimuli are presented to experimental subjects and physiological measurements are made showing that the body can react in advance of the presentation of the stimuli, even though they're presented in a random order.
That's right. If you're going to hear a loud noise in the future, your physiology shows in advance that you're going to experience this loud, unpleasant noise. Your body knows that something's going to happen to you.
So
that's very interesting. And I think this will be reiterated later, but I want him to say that again, because I don't think people don't see the significance of that or catch that. And people take this as you don't have free will or whatever's going to happen, but that's not how I see it. But basically what they're saying is that your nerves respond like a significant amount of time, like a half a second before the stimuli. Feel me? Let's hear that again. Let's take it back like this far.
Presented in a random order.
That's right. If you're going to hear a loud noise in the future, your physiology shows in advance that you're going to experience this loud, unpleasant noise. Your body knows that something's going to happen to you.
So it's very possible that this process, backward causality, is happening all the time around us. It's not just the occasional precognitive dream, which is very visible to.
Everything is happening all the time. Everything, everywhere, all at once. So, but where do you want to focus your attention? Where do you want to place anchor points? And well, let's let them finish.
To us, but at a more subliminal level, we're always receiving influences from the future.
I think so.
So yeah, like I said, I'm taking my time. Maybe this is something that needs to be well thought out. When you hit the link, hit the link. When this is posted on the Psyopulence channel, the dry spots will be cut out. Let's get into the next one before we get into the main clip of the show. And give me 1 second. Give me 1 second. Boom. A real-life quantum delayed choice experiment. So let's see.
Hey everyone, today I'm going to be showing you Wheeler's delayed choice experiment. A few videos ago I did an experiment in which I set up a time traveler's party. And at the end of that video I mentioned a little bit about how time travel is actually possible in quantum mechanics. And I didn't say much else about it. This is just a regular green laser pointer. And in the center here I have a beam splitter. What a beam splitter does is it has a 50-50 chance of letting a photon either go through it or be reflected. So that means that half of the light is going to go through it and half of the light is going to be reflected. And then I have a mirror right here and right here. These are just gauge blocks at the bottom to keep everything parallel. So if it takes this path, it can pass through the beam splitter, hit this mirror, and then be reflected off the beam splitter to hit this lens at the back here. But if it takes this path, it can get reflected off the beam splitter, hit this mirror, go through the beam splitter, and then end up at this lens as well. So at the end, we're actually combining both beams together. A simplified diagram of it looks like this. So you can see we have the red path and the blue path. The beam splitters are shown in green here, and the mirrors are the gray boxes. What I can do is I can actually move this beam splitter and slide it down so that it doesn't recombine back at this spot and just has two different paths that go off in either direction. You can see the actual paths of the laser here when I put some smoke on it. Now that we understand the setup, let me show you why this is interesting. We know that light can act like it's made of waves. So when I have the second beam splitter there, the light from each beam combines so that it can actually constructively and destructively interfere with each other. So that when I shine the light on the backstop here, we can actually see the interference pattern. When I block one of the mirrors, you can see that the interference pattern disappears. But if I remove the second beam splitter by sliding it out of the way, then we just have two beams of light, and we can actually stick a particle detector right here. Whenever the light hits the particle detector, it only becomes whole pieces of light, or photons as we call them. There's never a half a photon that hits the particle detector. So we know that whenever we see the light with a particle detector, it always comes in discrete little packets that we call photons. In fact, we can stick the detector anywhere in the path of the light, and we always show that it is whole photons that hit the detector. There's no indication that these photons are being split up or traveling in both paths. But we also know that light acts like a wave when we have the second beam splitter.
Hold on, I want to hear that again.
Light with a particle detector, it always comes in discrete little packets that we call photons. In fact, we can stick the detector anywhere in the path of the light, and we always show that it is whole photons that hit the detector.
So the detector is showing the integrity of the beam, meaning should maintain integrity.
There's no indication that these photons are being split up or traveling in both paths. But we also know that light acts like a wave when we have the second beam splitter there. So let's try to reconcile this difference by shooting only one photon through at a time. This is actually possible with specialized lasers. If we shoot only one at a time, then that means the two photons can't possibly be interfering with each other, and we can try to track where each individual photon is going. So if we shoot through only one photon at a time, the odd thing is that they still accumulate on the backstop and show an interference pattern. So that means that the photons must have been traveling as waves that split up and went both directions, and then those waves recombine.
So light doesn't behave like a wave sometimes. It obviously is a form of a wave. But I don't know why these people do this.
At the second beam splitter to make an interference pattern. But if I remove this second beam splitter, then the wave pattern disappears and I only measure individual discrete photons. And the only way these photons that hit this spot could reach this point is if they had traveled the entire distance as a whole photon, because if they went the other direction, they wouldn't end up at this point. So it's as if the photons have to decide whether to travel as a wave or a particle based on if this second beam splitter's here or not. If it's here,
It's almost as if the photons have to decide to travel as a wave or a particle.
point is if they had traveled the entire distance as a whole photon, because if they went the other direction, they wouldn't end up at this point. So it's as if the photons have to decide whether to travel as a wave or a particle based on if this second beam splitter's here or not. If it's here, then the photons traveled as waves the whole time, but if I remove it, then they traveled as particles the whole time. So I guess we can accept that, but now let's get a little bit tricky. Let's say that we have the two beam splitters in place so that each individual photon is traveling as a wave that gets split up at the first beam splitter. But then mid-flight, we remove the second beam splitter. What will we detect at these 2 points? Well, we always find an individual whole photon. But that means that the photon was a wave, and then suddenly, as soon as we removed the beam splitter, it had to retroactively go back in time and actually become a whole particle that was never split up.
Hold on.
Then mid-flight, we remove the second beam splitter. What will we detect at these 2 points? Well, we always find an individual whole photon. But that means that the photon was a wave, and then suddenly, as soon as we removed the beam splitter, it had to retroactively go back in time and actually become a whole particle that was never split up. So by removing the second beam splitter, we're causing the photon to...
All right, but these guys they think so linearly that they're assuming that it has to go back and become that. Why is that? Why can't this be instantaneously? You feel me? Now, like,
have to retroactively choose whether or not to be a wave or a particle at the beginning of the journey. Now, if we don't believe that the photon can go back in time and choose to act as a wave or a particle, a different interpretation is that the photon always travels as a wave, but as soon as you try to measure where the photon is, it suddenly collapses into a particle.
Okay, okay.
This is the most popular interpretation, and it's the way that we currently describe quantum effects most of the time. And before we end, I'd like to thank Exter for sponsoring this video. Exter makes really cool minimalist wallets that are
It's I don't know, these scientists always describe it as like collapsing in form or whatever, you know? Seems like similar to like decay. And maybe the closer you are to this physical reality, the closer you are to the state of decay, putrefaction, life, death, cycles, all that stuff, you know? So yeah, let's get to the main joint. And as it says in the title, Colloquium de retro causalitas, a conversation about retrocausality. This is a conversation. So if you want to join, because the actual retrocausality show will be much more concise and put together. We're just this is open study basically. So you know the link is in the chat. What part of this did I want to go to? Yeah, let's start here.
Because I'm talking about inspiration, like the idea of ideas that come from nowhere. The title of the book is From Nowhere. Thoughts that just pop into our head. For artists, you know, they pay attention to those things. That's where they get their ideas.
So the muse.
The muse, or, you know, different cultures have had different words for it. Yeah, the Greeks had a lot of words for it. You know, muse is the demon is one word. But, you know, and every culture has ideas.
The daemon. He said a mouthful really quickly there. So let's take this shit back to the very pop off. Give me a second. Let's take it back to the very pop off. Where's it at? There we go.
And that's what the new book is about, because I'm talking about inspiration, like the idea of ideas that come from nowhere. The title of the book is From Nowhere. Thoughts that just pop into our head. For artists, you know, they pay attention to those things. That's where they get their ideas.
So
you know?
the muse.
The muse, or, you know, different cultures have had different words for it. Yeah, the Greeks had a lot of words for it. You know, muse is the demon is one word. But, you know, and every culture has ideas about where ideas come from. It may be from the Lord, you know, it may be from the gods, it may be from the muses or spirits, the spirit world, or whatever. I mean, every culture has theories about this. I know you've had Diana Pasulka on your show, and she, you know, writes about tech people who think that they get ideas from the non-human intelligences behind the phenomenon. You know, that's a new kind of variant of a very old idea that, you know, that our thoughts come from some external, you know, source in the spirit world or whatever.
Yeah, there are people talk about a protocol you can follow where you can open up a portal to channel some sort of download, right? Some sort of creative download or inspirational download that can help them in what they're trying to ultimately achieve. Stephen Pressfield writes about this too. He has a book called The War of Art. He talks about channeling the muse. He's a writer, and he talks about, you know, he spent his whole life.
War of Art. I've read that. Very good book.
Writing, and he talks about how he was a failed writer most of his life until he came up with The War of Art. And the muse, essentially, he talks about like showing up to work every day, sitting down and putting pen to paper. And he goes, every day, he goes, I have to sit down, I have to start writing every day. I don't know when the muse is going to show up, but all I know is I have to be disciplined to sit down, start writing, and then maybe an hour later, maybe 2 hours later, the muse will arrive. But you have to sit down and do the work first. And he also talks about a thing called
expand that thought into everything else. because it's crazy. Like I'm an artist already, so I know exactly what they're talking about. But that concept needs to be taken outside of art and writing, and because art and writing is spiritual. But when you realize that everything is art and you turn your whole life into art, that means everything is spiritual. You feel me? So when you spoke about that, like I'm an artist, so my mind is already on the art space. But when you said that, I visualized a technical analysis chart, like a forex chart or a stock chart. I visualized it and how I've been working on the charts lately, and like, damn, I've really been like doing artwork on that shit.
He talks about what's the word he uses for it? It's like distractions or something. Anyways, he talks about the all the things in life that are meant to that try to distract you from achieving that, right? Like whatever it is, like distractions or doing other things, and you know, it's really hard to channel that thing. Anyways, yeah, like you said, people have been talking about this, you know, throughout history.
Right. Well, what I'm arguing in the new book is that, you know, I'm not going to say it's not spirits or the Lord or, you know, or non-human intelligences, but that most of the time it's your own self. It's your future self. That's, you know, you are tapping into, you know, things that are going to happen in your future. And that
And I'm in agreement with him there. You are the genius. You are your higher self. Like, I could go over this so much, and I don't know. Maybe we'll see if a Halo or somebody pass by. That would be very nice to get some ideas to bounce off of. Because once this is presented in the second iteration of this show, we're gonna have this is gonna be special.
that's where your best ideas are coming from. They're coming from your future, and exactly the same way that it works in dreams. But you asked about it happening in waking life. Well, that's the way it happens for most. I mean, some artists, you know,
That's where your best ideas are coming from. They're coming from the future. What have I said a million times? What have I said a million times? And gave the reference to the quantum studies of flow state and freestyle rapping. Now just bring that down to the microcosm of just like freestyle rapping. You're living in the past because you're thinking of what you said, because you might reference it in the future. You're living in the preference and thinking in you're living in the present and thinking in the present as you deliver the material, and you're living in the future where you're thinking what you're going to say next, all at the same time. Now, with what he just said, your best ideas come from the future. Think of any time you've been in a flow state with whatever you've done. You feel me? And I think like art or dancing or rapping or something where you can kind of quantify what's going on, like loosely, is a good way to look at it. Because okay, even somebody who does a sport who like really flows or like dribbling or something like that. Once you get into the flow, it gets iller and iller. It gets better and better and more incredible, and more novelty comes out of nowhere. Your ideas get sicker. The patterns that you're making get sicker and sicker. The intricacies get more the intricacies get more complicated and interesting as you move forward. And then it doesn't stop. It keeps building to this crescendo until you become overly amazed with yourself. That's the hardest part about staying in the zone, or flow state, the zone or flow state, whatever you want to call it. It's like let me not give that example. Hey, we're over here. Let's give that example. It's like I've never been the best gamer, feel me, video game player. I'm not really that interested in it. But I have homies who are really good official gamers, you know? So I've linked with these people before, and under the influence of let's just keep it ambiguous, of a psychedelic, I've had incredible accuracy on video games, and it's something I usually never be capable of that. And but here's the interesting part: when you're performing at a super high level, you don't fumble until you become astonished by how well you're performing. But I don't know. I think I might be going too deep for motherfucker. It is what it is, man. This is where this channel is going. psyopulence. You feel me?
Certainly get their ideas from dreams, but they're most are getting them in this sort of inspired states, or when the muse hits them, or however you want to describe it.
Right.
And there's so there's a million compelling examples of people channeling their future in their art. I mean, we all already saw Michael Richards. Let me give you another example, a beautiful example of this that I just learned about this, a few weeks ago after I'd finished the book, so I couldn't include it in the book. But this was a guy named, I can give you his actual name, Kevin Archer, because he wrote a blog post about it. A really beautiful little blog post. Where I had known him, or we had been communicating a few years ago, because after Time Loops, he sent me some of his precognitive dreams. He'd had, a few really interesting precognitive dreams. I used one of them as an example in my dream workbook. But this story was not a dream. So this starts when he was 10. Okay. He was in school he's in England, and I'm not sure exactly what grade that equates to in the English school system, but he was, I guess it was the last year of primary school or whatever. His teacher assigned the class to imagine that they were some ancestor of theirs in any kind of historical period, and to just write a story about being that ancestor. Okay. So this guy's name is Archer, and he said he'd always wondered about where that name came from. Okay. So he writes this story. He's just thinking this up. He writes this story where he's a bowman, an archer on a medieval battlefield. Okay. And he sort of describes the armor he was wearing, and describes the scene of the battle and all that. And describes that, this ancestor of his, he describes how he had prevailed as a bowman so successfully that the king said, from now on, you must call yourself Archer. Okay. So, the teacher apparently talked to his parents and said, this was such a good story. I felt like I was transported into medieval times, whatever. Okay. So fast forward 40 years. Okay. He's now about 50, and his young daughter is asking about her heritage. And so he, again, he's now in an age where you can look these things up on the internet rather than, which wasn't the case, 40 years ago. So he starts doing a little genealogy research, or not even doing the genealogy research. He just immediately finds online that one of his distant cousins had been doing the genealogy of his family, and had a vast spreadsheet of the Archer family. Okay. Well, the very first entry of this spreadsheet he sends him is the story of this bowman in Henry V's army at the Battle of Agincourt in 1415. And this ancestor was named Simon de Boys. All right. And if you know anything about the Battle of Agincourt, it was won partly because of the English bowmen. They were vastly outnumbered by the French in this forest or near a forest, but their bowmen were superior, and that the archers sort of won the day. And it's a very famous battle, and Shakespeare's Henry V, the famous speech, we band of brothers, that comes from Shakespeare's story about the Battle of Agincourt and Henry V. Anyway, so the very first cell in this spreadsheet about this guy's genealogy explains how Simon de Boys, was so successful as an archer, or as a bowman in the Battle of Agincourt, that Henry V awarded him an annual stipend of 5 marks or whatever, which was a pretty good salary, on the condition that he change his name to Archer.
You know what's in your cheap protein powder? Well,
Yeah, so you do what you want to do with that information. We're going to keep it rolling. I'm just vibing right now. Maybe somebody will want to pull up and give their opinion. But this is not even the main part I wanted to get to. That's actually further.
Okay. So it's exactly
That's
what he
wild.
wrote about
Yeah.
randomly at age 10. Now, he, like any person who's at all skeptical, and you should be skeptical of these stories, he immediately reached out to his parents and said, "Did you guys know any of this history about our name? Had you ever told me this? Am I just imagining that I didn't know this at the time?" And they were just as was as new to them as it was to him. He never knew this history. And there's an added detail to it. Like, a lot of people are going to hear that story and think, "Oh, well, maybe he was the reincarnation of Simon Du Bois or something like that." Okay.
Oh yeah, like he was remembering a previous life.
A life, yeah, okay.
That's what Kripal talks about too.
Well, in his subsequent to this, he learned that story about the origin of the name Archer happening after the Battle of Agincourt is false. That actually the family name Archer originates a few decades before that battle, and it wasn't that story at all. So it's not, he wasn't like remembering some past life, because that was actually kind of fictional, or it was a fiction that he wrote, or a bit of kind of legend or folklore that he read.
Interesting, man.
So he was precognizing in his inspired moment, or it wasn't inspired. I mean, he was just forced to write a story in school. And so kind of what emerges under his pen as he's writing is this amazing learning experience he would have 4 decades in his future about his ancestry. It's just a lovely example of what I think happens all the time when artists are working, whether it's, getting that kind of random out of the blue, "Oh my God, this new idea, comes landing in your head," or whether you're just doing what you described, which is just kind of the work of sitting down and like forcing yourself to work. I'll give you another example that's, I think some people are going to like raise their eyebrows at this, and I would love to hear people's reactions to this, but, so I was watching. So I'm obviously, when I read artist biographies now, or when I learn about an artist's process, I'm always kind of looking for possible examples of this. And so I was, a couple of years ago when it came out, I was one of those people just utterly blown away by Get Back, the Peter Jackson's series about the Beatles and their creation of the
Fun fact.
One of the rules of science, modern science, when it was first emerging in the 17th century, was that you had to banish anything that had to do with God. Okay, you had to keep God out of it. They were looking for naturalistic explanations for phenomena. So one of the things that they threw out in the bathwater, basically, with God, was teleology, what's called teleology. Now, teleology is the idea of causes running in reverse. We would now call it retrocausation. That's the term that physicists now use.
Causes running in reverse.
In temporal reverse. That is to say, something in the future affecting something in the past. Okay? We usually think of causes going forward in time, know, but
effect happening first, cause happening later.
Exactly. Yeah, an effect happening before a cause.
Right.
Okay. So at that time, teleology was just assumed to be like, if you were talking about teleology, you were automatically talking about God's plan. All right. And
let's see what this is. What would it be called? T-I? Teleology. The explanation of phenomena in terms of the purpose they serve rather than the cause, which rather than this is written strangely. The explanation of phenomena in terms of the purpose they serve rather than of the cause by which they arise. You got a wiki on this? I suppose so. I'm pretty lit. Excuse me. Excuse me. Yeah, stop that. So, teleology. I can make it talk. Oh, I thought I could just get this shit to dictate. Oh, teleology. Telos, Greek. Wait, telos is the Greek. Telos is a term used by. I'm tripping. Hold on. Telos is a term used by philosopher Aristotle to refer to the final cause of a natural organ. The final cause of a natural organ or entity or of human art. Telos is the root of the modern term teleology, the study of purposiveness, or of objects with a view of their aims, purpose, or intentions. Slogos. So I'll get to that in a different show. Explanation or finality is a branch of causality giving the reason or explanation for something as a function of its end, its purpose, or its goal. That's interesting how everything's linked together. Like a means to an end. Like if you're working out, you can, and it's like the stronger your vision is, the stronger your will would be to change this thing in the reality, which is your body, you know? But if you're doing that at that time, what you're doing in that moment is for the future to attain whatever your weight loss or your ideal physique or whatever. But in having that vision and determination in the moment that teleports you to the future, it's like that future. It just lock it. I don't know how do you say it? It's like quantum locking. Is that a term? It's like locking you in. It's further locking you or helping you create this tapestry of the reality that you're creating for yourself on both ends, like simultaneously. But it all comes from the emotion, the focus, will, the visualization of a now. You feel me? Yeah, the teleology. I got enough of this, so we'll go back to homie.
And so teleology got thrown out of science because it was not fair bringing God into the equation. And if you were talking about causes running backwards in time, you were implicitly at that time talking about God's divine plan. All right.
Okay.
So now, so the idea, the presumption that causes only run in one direction, it worked fine in science for a couple centuries, but then almost exactly a century ago, physicists discovered that on the smallest scales in nature, and we're talking about quantum scales, it doesn't quite work. That there's this element that's always been called randomness or indeterminacy or uncertainty. Okay. And so quantum physics for the last century has been about this component of causation that cannot be predicted from past events, from prior events. And now you have all these interpretations of quantum, of this mystery. Okay, there's a lot of different interpretations. You got the Copenhagen interpretation. You have the many worlds interpretation. You have like a lot of different sort of competing interpretations of what it means that certain things cannot be predicted from a chain of prior causes.
And you got to realize that certain things not being able to be predicted from a chain of prior causes is an issue for these people, For me, or at least for us over here, this is not an issue. This is just a branch of infinite possibility.
And one of the theories is retrocausation. Well, wait a minute. Maybe causes are propagating from the future to the past, as well as from the past to the future. And maybe that's what accounts for this thing we're calling randomness. Now, one of the most influential figures in early quantum mechanics was Niels Bohr. And he was a very brilliant man and very sort of powerful personality. And he sort of dominated the conversation, like in the early years of quantum physics.
Okay.
And he sort of convinced people that it's just random, and you have to accept that the world is random on the smallest scales in nature, and we have to just accept it. And there's no reason for it. And that you've probably heard the idea of wave functions collapsing, the collapse of the wave function. This is kind of the core mystery in quantum physics, is like things are they're mostly unpredictable until you make a measurement, and then things take on a solid reality. There's kind of things behave as waves.
Double slit experiment.
Double slit, all that, yeah.
And here's another thing. Everyone was like this is like anybody who's looked into this stuff at all has heard of the double slit experiment. And they always leave it at where they leave it. Oh, you observe it, it does it. You don't observe it, and it's random. That's like, all right, we understand it. We heard that a million times. Where did the next level of these experiments go and observations go? What were the variables that were added, and what were the results? You never hear about this. I want to do my own double slit experiment, see what I can make pop off.
And sort of there's this mystery of what happens when you make a measurement of something, and that from that there's a popular idea that somehow it's observation itself that collapses the wave function, and maybe it has to do with our consciousness or something like that. Right. That's one. It's not a mainstream idea in physics, but that's been taken up by, certainly by people in the New Age and stuff. It's an appealing idea that somehow it's our minds that are causing reality or whatever.
Right.
But anyway, Bohr said, just don't worry about it. Just do the math. The equations, can be used to predict very well what happens to particles in the aggregate. Like if you have a bunch of particles, you can tell exactly what's going to happen, even if you don't know what's going to happen to a single particle because of this indeterminacy factor. But more and more physicists now are talking about retrocausation, that, hey, wait a minute. What if that whole randomness thing, what if it isn't random? What if my measurement now of this particle, this electron, is actually causing what happened in its past? And in that case, it's not random. And there's this retrograde component in causation, retrocausation. And they have actually done experiments that suggest that that's what's going on. I'll give you an example. This is from my book, Time Loops. I talk about this. But in 2009, there's new methods in quantum physics that are enabling researchers to kind of probe this question.
Okay.
And one of the methods is called weak measurement. I mean, it's kind of complicated how it works, but the idea is, in most measurements, you affect the thing you're measuring, and so it causes problems. But there's this method called weak measurement, which is if you like weakly measure a bunch of particles, you can kind of like measure them without affecting them. Okay. So what they did in this experiment, it's very similar to what happened in Daryl Bem's experiment, except this time we're using photons, not Cornell undergraduates. Okay, just substitute photons for the Cornell undergraduates. Basically, what they did was they took a laser beam, all right, and they put it through a beam splitter. So you have the same beam, but then it's split into two. All right. Now, then what they did was they weakly measured the photons in both beams. All right. And then they subjected one of the beams to a strong measurement, if you want to put it that way. And what they discovered was that back in time when they were weakly measured, the photons that got the later strong measurement had been amplified significantly. So that later measurement amplified the photons in their past.
Don't get lost in what he said. Because only what he said at the end really matters. And I want him to say that one more time. Where we at 132 for, let's go right here.
Experiment, except this time we're using photons, not Cornell undergraduates. Okay, just substitute photons for the Cornell undergraduates. Basically, what they did was they took a laser beam, all right, and they put it through a beam splitter. So you have the same beam, but then it's split into two, all right. Now, then what they did was they weakly measured the photons in both beams, all right, and then they subjected one of the beams to a strong measurement, if you want to put it that way. And what they discovered was that back in time when they were weakly measured, the photons that got the later strong measurement had been amplified significantly.
Amplified significantly. All right. And this reminds me of something that Brother Panic said in a lecture before about how to heal your trauma. And I guess this same technique can be used to enhance all types of things. So what he would say is that you can time travel, which mentally, physically, maybe all is mental. So you time travel through visualization, emotionally, the senses, everything. Feel where you were, see where you were, the time of when this trauma took place, right? And when you re-enter that space, when you were back there, you turn the tables. And you need to understand that you need to have the imagination of a child. You know, I wanted to get into this later. I'll get into this later when they bring it up. But you need to have the imagination of a child, meaning you can do whatever you want. Use whatever level of emotion you need, and you can do whatever you want. If you need to be some type of amalgamations of superheroes that you like to get the job done, get the job done. If it's in your natural proclivity to heal everything and use like heart power like Captain Planet and turn your abuser into butterflies and everything into light, if that helps, do that. If your natural proclivity is to go in the other direction and you need to see this thing ravaged and destroyed and burnt and turned to ash, do that, you know? And you're thinking, oh, that's insignificant. That's just your imagination. You're just fooling around. Nope. You time traveled, you amplified yourself in the past, and now you have healed and amplified yourself in the future. Basically what he just said. And I'm here now, so I'm gonna let him say it again. Feel me? I'm letting him say it again. 131, it's right there.
Called weak measurement, which is if you like weakly measure a bunch of particles, you can kind of like measure them without affecting them, okay? So what they did in this experiment, it's very similar to what happened in Daryl Bem's experiment, except this time we're using photons, not Cornell undergraduates, okay? Just substitute photons for the Cornell undergraduates. Basically what they did was they took a laser beam, all right, and they put it through a beam splitter. So you have the same beam, but then it's split into two, all right? Now then what they did was they weakly measured the photons in both beams, all right? And then they subjected one of the beams to a strong measurement, if you want to put it that way. And what they discovered was that back in time when they were weakly measured, the photons that got the later strong measurement had been amplified significantly. So that later measurement amplified the photons in their past. I see the look on your face, but it's the exact look, on your face when you learned about Daryl Bem's experiments. I mean, you like, what the fuck? But it means that causes that events in the future at time point B somehow affect things at time point A in the past. And the idea.
Yeah, I think what they're leaving out, like, yes, events at time point B are affecting events at time point A, but and enhancing the understanding of that means a better outcome for C, time point C.
Idea, I think the idea of me and others who study precognition are that, okay, so the brain is somehow, well, first of all, a lot of more and more people now think that the brain is some kind of quantum computer or a quantum, sort of a hybrid quantum classical computer, because there seem to be quantum processes going on inside neurons. You've probably heard about microtubules. Well, yes. So microtubules, one theory of consciousness is that they have to do with these little molecular quantum computers inside neurons called microtubules. Well, I think microtubules are responsible for.
No, you're not just gonna glaze over that, bro. Pause. Yeah, you're not just gonna. Yeah, we're gonna hear that again. It's at 14. 33.
Tubules, one theory of consciousness is that they have to do with these little molecular quantum computers inside neurons called microtubules. Well, I think microtubules are responsible for reshaping the synapses during learning. And I think that microtubules are getting information from their future and reshaping the synapses based on what's going to happen to that cell in the future.
My name.
As soon as we get in deep, it had to drop the programming in there.
It's mind-blowing, but evidence for this is actually coming from the field of quantum computing, because one of the things that's being discovered in people who are working with quantum computers and working with models of quantum computers is that you can reverse temporality in a quantum computer circuit, and sort of essentially, my simplistic way of putting it is you can get an output before an input in a quantum computer circuit. And there's several articles on this phenomenon just in the last few years. So it's looking like quantum computers.
We need more information. You get an output before an input. So the output that you get void of input, is it relevant to something of the observer or some variable?
Might be more than just sophisticated number crunchers. I mean, it looks like, quantum computers might eventually make possible communication across time. This is a possibility that if you saw did you see the television show, The Peripheral? No. It's based on a novel by William Gibson. He wrote The Neuromancer back in the early 80s. He was sort of predicted, cyberspace and everything.
Right.
Well, his novel, The Peripheral, and they made it into an Amazon series a couple of years ago, is about people using a quantum computer server to communicate across time. And
wow.
Yeah. And so, but that if what's being shown in these early days of quantum computing, if it pans out that, oh yeah, this is, this isn't about sort of spatial non-locality. You'll hear that word non-locality a lot. It's about temporal non-locality. And, if that's.
It's not about spatial non-locality, it's about temporal non-locality. They say these things as if they're different. Like, what's the difference between time and space?
If these threads from quantum computing are true, if these threads of quantum biology hold, that indeed the brain is a quantum computer or involves quantum computation, well, right there you would have a physical explanation for how information from the future could get into the past, and how we could have precognitive dreams, or we could have what exactly happen to you, where it's like, oh, a thought comes into your head about this random person you haven't thought of in ages, and suddenly you get a call from them. What if this is always happening?
Right.
What if this is always happening, and that's kind of a part of like a guidance system?
What if everything all at once is always happening? No way, bro. No way, bro. It's so, I don't know, why is it so difficult for these science-minded people to just be like, this is obvious. If you weren't clouded with propaganda and nonsense all the time, you'd just be living in this reality. This is the natural way of thinking.
Or the analogy I draw in my dream workbook is to imagine the usefulness of something like this in like a safety device. And so I imagine my 2030 Tesla, has
2030 Tesla, whatever. So yeah, it's gonna have what he's gonna say because I don't want to watch that again because I don't care. The applications in technology is some type of quantum precognition. Like you can have a airbag deploy like a millisecond, a little bit right before the crash actually happens.
But
Yeah, how does that change your life when you know that everything that's going to happen in your life is already predetermined? What does that even mean?
well, right. That's a great question, and I can't answer it for you. Like just sitting here. I mean, I've addressed this in my books. I talk about it a lot in the new book. I think, first of all, I think free will is, not the most helpful thing because it bogs you down. Like, why worry about it? Like we feel like we have free will. My actions right now affect the next moment, affects the next, our action, we can't escape what we experience as free will.
Some bored philosophers keeping them busy.
Right. I mean, essentially it is. I mean, so my tradition, my spiritual tradition, I would say is Zen. All right. And one of the things that comes through again and again in Zen enlightenment experiences is that you don't need free will. Free will is a kind of a mirage, and it's actually really blissful when you kind of break through this idea of free will and this worry about free will and this.
He sounds like he's kind of getting into the philosophy of Jason from Decode Yourself. But no, I'll shout out his channel, because I'm not saying I agree with everything he says over there, but it will make you think. So yeah, go check out in your free time. The channel is called Decode Yourself. I think the avatar is a smiley face.
This sense of having free will. In fact, like whenever you are the most like successful at whatever it is you do, whatever flow state you get into with whatever your athletic or creative or whatever, or when you're driving a car, you're not exerting conscious free will. Your unconscious is in complete control.
Right.
Back in the late 70s and early 80s, this guy named Benjamin Libet, a neuroscientist, you may have heard of him. He performed some really fascinating experiments that were really troubling for people because they showed that our nerves would initiate an action like a half second before we were consciously aware of it. Okay.
Whoa.
Right. Which you can interpret that in multiple ways. And the way that a lot of people interpreted it was that, well, free will is just a complete mirage and we don't exert, the sense that we have of being consciously in control of our lives is completely a mirage. Before we were consciously aware of it. Okay.
Whoa.
Right. Late 70s and early 80s, this guy named Benjamin Libet, a neuroscientist, you may have heard of him. He performed some really fascinating experiments that were really troubling for people because they showed that our nerves would initiate an action like a half second before.
Your nerves would initiate an action sometime before you were aware. So that just shows that something is making the physicality of the body aware. Because the machine is just a machine. So let's say the ghost of the machine or the higher or whatever. You are so it's all you. All this information keeps coming back to you. So you are making yourself aware that something is going to happen to you. And it's kind of like the same phenomenon accounts for like feeling like somebody's looking at you, or like knowing someone's gonna call, or this accounts for tons of phenomenon. It just shows like everything is everything. Now, but this is obvious to to us. This is obvious to us, or anybody who's been sticking around long enough during the show. This is obvious to you most likely. Now it's like this is like I said. This is the pre-show. before we get into everything we talk about over here is about application, not just endless. Oh, this is creepy, then you won't fall asleep. No, everything needs potential application. So we're gonna get into that.
Before we were consciously aware of it. Okay.
Whoa.
Right. Which you can interpret that in multiple ways. And the way that a lot of people interpreted it was that, well, free will is just a complete mirage and we don't exert, the sense that we have of being consciously in control of our lives is completely a mirage. Another way of looking at it is that we are controlling our lives, but from the future, that we are reflecting back on, think about how I don't know if you do a martial art or something. I used to do martial arts, and you'd make a particular move and you'd replay it in your head, like a successful move. You'd replay it in your head. Well, what if that mental replay, what if you are, that mental replay is actually causing, maybe you are actually pulling your meat puppet's strings from a position displaced into your future.
And that's interesting, and that ties to like a psychedelic experience that a homie had, and I was there. I don't want. Let's leave that for a different show. But like the strings from the future, it's very interesting. But we have Aaron. Aaron popped up for the precog show of Psyopulence, retrocausality, a conversation about retrocausality, Colloquium de Causalitas. Aaron says, is this like a reverse butterfly effect? If the airbag can predict the future, why not change it? Are they suggesting we can rewrite our past? We was kings. They're not suggesting. That's what the evidence shows. So it's not about suggestions, Or else, let me say, but that's what the evidence suggests. And I'm cross-referencing this with occult information and other people's ideas I've heard and how they laid it out and how it makes sense when you cross-reference it with the science, the cutting edge fringe science information. And in the quantum scientific community, this is what they're talking about: precognition, retrocausality, and then basically, if you look through all the old stuff that people have been doing forever, that's always what they've been looking into. Since the Gateway Project, the Gateway reports that's declassified, you can look into it now, which is probably not declassified for a good reason for you, but if you have discernment, you could probably pull something good out of it. But something like that. Everything is everything, man.
And that's what free will and agency, what if that's what it is? It's kind of retrocausation in the body. Yes, it raises there's amazing implications of retrocausation and its biological, physical manifestations as precognition, or what Daryl Bem called presentiment, feeling the future without being consciously aware. I think that's where it really mostly manifests. We're not consciously aware of seeing the future. I mean, that occasionally happens like in visions. People have precognitive visions. Right. But most of the time it's controlling us unconsciously. And the implications, if this exists at all, it's
astonishing.
It's astonishing, and I find it incredibly exciting, because it's like since the Enlightenment, if you can divide time into past and future, and then there's this line of the present in the middle of it. All we've been looking at causally for the last 3 centuries in the Enlightenment is this left half, but there's this whole right half, the future, that is, I think, and a growing number of physicists even think, is influencing our actions and influencing what happens in the physical world, that we just have had a mental block to, because we threw out teleology with God, 3 centuries ago.
Okay, so time loops. It's kind of hard to conceptualize. So we got here some of your infographics that explains how this works. So it says a time loop is a causally circular formation in the block universe. An effect retro influences its own causes. Okay, so on one side, so you have a line going through the center of this loop, right? And then the line represents time going forward from the present to the future. And on the left side of it, we have information traveling backwards in time, carried by strong emotion. And
That's the sauce right there. You feel me? That is the sauce. That is the sauce right there. Information travels backwards in time, carried by strong emotion. Where does this strong emotion come from? Usually you're thinking something, or there's visions in your mind, or something you've experienced, or something that may happen. You know what I'm saying? You can think of something sad, and you're not sad in the moment, but it will make you sad when you start seeing it in your mind. You know what I'm saying? That is a strong emotion that's making you travel to that space and time. That's why you're feeling that emotion from that space and time, because you are literally time traveling there. You feel me? But that's the sauce. And I see that my connection's looking like weak as soon as it gets into the real shit. You feel me? But yeah, information travels backwards in time, carried by strong emotion. And even this diagram, time is a line in the center, boom, going straight. But you see the time loop, the feedback. What does this look like? It's a vortex. It's a vortex. Time is linear because time is a part of the construct. Time is man-made. So that's just a line. It's linear. It's unnatural. But the vortex, the spiral is natural. And now you're just crossing over time, up and down, back and forth. Basically everything everywhere all at once. Everything is everything, infinite possibilities. Same thing I've been talking about. Now, you don't need to understand all these technicalities. You just need the little pieces. Okay, information travels backwards in time, carried by strong emotion. So strong emotion can carry information across time. So what else can I do with that? What else can I do with strong emotion?
on the right side of the
What about intentional? How does that? How about intentional? Yeah, I'm kind of late. My bad. How about emotion with intention? Intentionality. You feel me? What about emotion with intention? Because usually emotion is something that most people are swept in. It happens. Sometimes you're happy, sometimes you're sad, you're moving around in this ocean of emotion. What if you use your emotion to do the locomotion?
line, we have another curved arrow that is freely willed actions that lead to future outcomes. Okay.
So if we were like thinking about the Daryl Bem experiment, that would be a good example.
Okay.
Clicking on a curtain and suddenly being rewarded
And then, we're going back to the chart. We're going back to the chart because coming to this time here, information travels backwards in time, carried by strong emotion, dream, vision, artistic inspiration, etc. Present. Freely willed actions lead to future outcomes. Future. Rewarding or troubling experience. So this is not just a time loop. It's either a positive or negative. It's either a positive or negative feedback loop. And now your emotions, if you can get control of them, can change. If this can change this from a negative feedback loop into a positive feedback loop. And once you build inertia in the proper direction, then it's off to the races.
Ambition, right? Like if you're ambitious throughout your life to achieve something, or you know that you want to do something with your life, all of your actions are going to be directed towards achieving this goal that you think that your life, that you were destined to, in the present.
To be real, like, I don't even want them to talk. I don't even like that they're mundaning this down right now. Like, thank you, robot people, for making a diagram for me, AI people. Thank you. But that's all you really need to understand right here. And then in the next show, we'll really dive into, okay, now that we understand what this is, and now we understand the mechanism by which it works, carried by strong emotion. This guy who's you see, and they're definitely leaving a little bit of the special sauce out of it. Pause. They're leaving a little bit of the special sauce out of it because you think this guy who's referenced all these people precisely, oh, this scientist during this year wrote this in this book, and he's writing a book and all this. You think he doesn't know why he put that on the chart? Information travels backwards in time, carried by strong emotion. You think he doesn't have a clear reference point to put that on this diagram he made, a chart or whatever the hell, this infographic? That's the most important part of this whole thing. I think this is a great way to end it. This is a great way to end it. Yeah, so with that being said, shout out to Psyopulence, everybody in search of the anima opulenta. This has been a Colloquium de Retro Causalitas. And it is what it is. I'll see you in the next one.